Thank you. Arigato.
The Your Own Pay Podcast Network, inspiring, motivating, and educating entrepreneurs around the world. It's Demasi and Michael, just talking tech.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another Demasi and Michael Just Talking Tech episode. This is DM12, and like always, you can get the show notes over at yourownpay.com/DM12. I'm your host, Michael, at Payon, P-A-Y-O-W-N on Twitter, and he's
Demasi, and that's at Demasi on Twitter, D-A-M-A-S-H-E.
Awesome, Demasi. And what are we talking about on DM12 today?
So today we thought we would take a step back and talk to you all about the process that we go through for publishing our podcast. So we're going to start with, how we actually come up with topic ideas for the shows, all the way up to the process of you getting it in your ears.
And we appreciate each of you guys listening. Before we get into it, though, I want to tell Caitlin, thank you very much for listening, and we appreciate you. Demasi, I have an idea for a podcast, and usually the first thing I do is throw it over to you on iMessage, and I say, hey, how does this sound, and what do you think about it? What do we do once we decide that that's something that maybe we should act on?
So after we've had that conversation on iMessage and we decide that we want to do a show on this topic, we take it over to Trello. And me and Michael have been using Trello. Michael actually introduced me to Trello a few months ago. And we have a board for the DM show with several lists. We start out with the show ideas list that we use. So that show idea gets added to that list. And on that card for that particular idea, we add any links or snippets of information that we want to make sure that we cover or make sure that we put into the show notes. Once we've decided when we're going to do that show, we move that card over to the planned topics. So that means that's going to be something that we're going to pick from when we sit down to record a batch of episodes the next time. And from there, that card, once the show is recorded, that card gets moved over to our recorded shows list so that it's marked off as having been recorded. And then it enters a whole new workflow, because from there, there's kind of some automation done there with something called Butler Bot.
I love Butler Bot. So one thing that Butler Bot does is it allows you to, as Demasi said, add automation to your workflow in Trello. So when the episode has been recorded and it's on that recorded list, usually we'll add a due date to the card, or if we haven't added the due date to the card during the planned topic list, before it gets moved to the edited, it's my goal to have a due date on that card so we know when that episode will be published. And then when the podcast has been edited and someone uploads the MP3 file, then Butler Bot sees that MP3 file and it knows, hey, whenever a file is added to this card that contains the MP3 attachment, because you got to remember, we're attaching show notes to the podcast as well, then it will move it over, and that's beautiful. So once I know that we have the podcast edited and either Demasi has edited it or I finished editing all of the content of the podcast, we'll add the podcast network intro and the intro to our podcast episode, which, as a hint, I've saved that as one file. I used to keep it as 2 files, but I'm like, why am I doing this every day? I'm going to save it as one Demasi and Michael Just Talking Tech with network intro file. I add that file to the beginning, and then we add the outro to the end, and then we run it through a service called Auphonic. We talked about Auphonic back in DM11. After the podcast is ran through Auphonic, I attach the MP3 to the card, which moves the card to the edited list, alerting Demasi that it's ready for him to type up the show notes. I open the show notes in Ulysses, click on the publish button, and then I schedule the blog post to go into WordPress. When WordPress comes up with the edit window page where I can make edits to the blog post, I'll add any sort of tags or categories and then make any modifications to the podcast episode. We use Libsyn to host the episode, so I'll click the "This is a podcast episode" checkbox, click on attach file, and then I choose the file that I downloaded from the Trello card. Then we schedule the episode by clicking on edit date and time, and I choose the Tuesday that this podcast episode is going live. I hit schedule, and then my hands are done. Well, That's all I need to do to publish the episode. I'll then go into ConvertKit and schedule a follow-up email, and we copy the show notes out of the podcast show notes page over to LinkedIn. But that's pretty much the workflow that I follow after I get the episode from Demasi, the show notes and the edited podcast. So as you can hear, that's the quick workflow that we go into and that we follow in order to publish these Demasi and Michael Just Talking Tech podcast episodes. Of course, your feedback is what drives our podcast ideas and gives us the reason we should be producing these episodes for you.
Absolutely. And what we tend to do is we take feedback via the comments field on the blog. We get comments on Twitter. Some people email us directly. They may have our personal emails. They email us directly. However the feedback comes in, we take it and we try to incorporate that into a show because we want to talk about the things that you're interested in knowing. Me and Michael are currently talking to each other over ringers, very similar to talking to each other over Skype or over FaceTime audio, except that Ringer is recording everything that we say. When we're done with our recording, we take that episode, we download it, we get separate tracks, one for me, one for Michael, and somebody goes in and edits that episode, whether it's Michael or whether it's me. Whichever one of us happens to write up the show notes, we're writing those show notes in Markdown, which is a plain text markup language. It makes it very easy to move that document from place to place, whether it's attached to a Trello card, whether it's in Dropbox. We don't have to worry about having application-specific file type. So there's no Word document. There's no having to open up an RTF file and looking for an application on this device or this platform that can handle that file type because it's all just plain text.
Exactly. And it's really important that you realize what goes into publishing these podcast episodes, because some people just think you sit down and record and publish the episode. And that's what I thought when I got started. And when you want to produce higher quality content, then you definitely need to put the time and effort into it. So that's a quick glimpse into our workflow in publishing this podcast. Demasi, do you have anything else you want to add before we conclude?
That's it. Thank you all for listening. We truly, truly appreciate it.
You can get the notes and more description of this workflow process, even a list of the names of lists we're using over at yourownpay.com/DM12. I'm at Payon, P-A-Y-O-W-N on Twitter. He's
at Demasi, D-A-M-A-S-H-E on Twitter.
And we'll talk to you guys next week.
You've been listening to Your Own Pay Podcast. If you've enjoyed today's episode, visit yourownpay.com/cast for exclusive content and to contact us today. We're eager to hear your thoughts and about how you're making this podcast your own. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon. The Your Own Pay Podcast, yourownpay.com.